Greetings all, Shane Bruce, resto my daisy. Today we're going to do a short video about, believe it or not, cap guns. I posted a couple of times on these earlier attempts I had at making toy weapons, and we've gotten an amazing amount of commentary back from this. So today I'm going to do my best to answer a question I got from a viewer, which is how do you make the internal parts? I mean, the external stuff is pretty obvious. So it's a wooden stock, it's a metal lock. This is an example up here of the original that I based all these guns on. This was a Paris, Tennessee Freedom Rifle, and it's really brutally simple. You have a simple wooden stock, a simple steel barrel, a ramrod. These guns originally fired cork balls, although I have yet to ever physically be able to get that done. Now, I've never found one that worked. Real simple mechanism. You pull the hammer back, the trigger clicks, and then you pull the trigger, and as you can see, a cap would be placed here, and it would go bang and make smoke. And this little thing here in the holes was an actual cork ball. And you'll find a lot of these Freedom guns just like this one. The cork ball is lodged. It won't come out. It's been pecked at, but it's still in there. But that was how they originally sold the gun. It would actually shoot a cork ball. Although, once again, I've never fired a cork ball out one. And I've never heard of anybody, or never met anybody who actually did themselves. So, to replicate that, I started building these little guys. These are steel lock plates as opposed to cast aluminum or Chinesium, wherever they get that stuff from. And it's got internal linkages. So one of my viewers wanted to know, how do you make that happen? Well, it's not that tough, but it is rather crude. This is a current production lock plate from Paris, Tennessee for the current production gun. As you can see, it's a hammer on a post with a coil spring. And that's what actuates the entire hammer mechanism. So a coil spring, a pivot for the coil spring, and a post to rotate. So in my cap guns, all I did was replicate that. Here we have our hammer. It's tied off here to a sear with a coil spring that would rest on a pin or a screw at the back of the lock plate to provide tension when you actually activate the lock. Of course, these require to have a requirement to be wound up a bit, so it would be like in this position up here. So hard to manipulate when it's not mounted. But in terms of parts, the hammer itself is just a piece of 1/4-inch steel that's been cut on a bandsaw, polished and profiled. The lock plate is a piece of 1/8-inch steel that has been drilled for the center nut, and then a mounting screw and a place to put the coil spring, provide tension for the hammer. As you can see, these are handmade coil springs. They're rather crudely wrapped, and they go up to a pivot up to a post to put tension on the structure. Now, in my early days when I was making these, I was using what is that stuff called? A locking fluid to lock the bolts in place. And I've discovered over time, if you really run these guns, and I mean collect them a lot, eventually the repeated impacts will shake that free. So probably a better solution to that would be to go ahead and tack weld it in place once you've got the build finish. But that can represent problems if you want to use a brass screw and a steel thread, or a homemade steel sear. So that's one of the reasons I kind of got out of that, was the fabrication issues were pretty extreme. Now this is the trigger plate. As you can see, it's just a piece of I think it was 1/2-inch box cut on a bandsaw. So you had 2 flanges left. There's a pin there, and underneath is a very simple coil spring. It's just wraps around the pin and provides tension against the trigger. But it works really well. So the trigger sear would engage with the hammer sear, and when you pull the trigger out of the way, like so, then the hammer can rotate on through the strike. So real elemental lock work, not difficult to build. Difficult to get to work right, though, so it's a bit of a fiddly bits operation, but anybody can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. And those are the 2 pivotal components. That's a lock plate and a trigger. Now, the breech plugs are formed out of just a piece of 1/2-inch round steel. Here on the pistol version, you can see that that's exactly what it is. It's just been polished, rounded over, and stepped down because the barrels are all 1/2-inch copper pipe. They're not expected to fire anything. Copper's fine, and they do work. Another issue that you'll run into when you start fabricating these things is trying to figure out how to get these muzzle bands correct. I mean, that one looks pretty good and works pretty good, but it's hard to attach. And I've done this a couple of different ways, like on this long rifle. We took a piece of copper end cap, just a 3/4 inch pipe cap, and hammered it to get our profile that we're looking for. So we have a modest front sight blade, fits into the gun, and most importantly, holds the barrel in place. This is a carbine I built for my grandson. As you can see, it's got the same basic steel plug, 1/2 inch barrel, but a very rudimentary cap. I mean, essentially all it was is just one of these slipped over. I didn't bother to hand form it or anything at this particular time. The trigger guards are just basically 18 gauge steel cut in strips and then formed using nails and hammers and pliers to get the profile that you want. Not the toughest thing in the world to do. The hardest part of the whole gig is getting the stock fabricated, and these are glue ups. I think a glue up, 2 pieces of wood glued together, make for a better build experience, because this configuration is going to have more strength than just a single plank. And by the time you've gotten the channels cut, the profiling done, you've got a pretty thin piece of wood. So that's how we do cap guns at Resto My Daisy. Although, truth be told, we haven't done one of these in 2 years. Hope you enjoyed that. That's all we've got for you today, kids. This is Shane Bruce with Resto My Daisy, signing off.